Good afternoon. I'm Machine Mate First Class Edwin Moreno from Goochland County, Virginia. I'm in the United States Submarine Service, and I'd like to introduce this fella. You are?
Jack Radican. I'm a staff sergeant in the Army Air Corps in World War II. And this is my friend Nick.
I'm Nick Alexander from Boise, Idaho. Entered the military in 1943. I became a tech sergeant, and that was because I was able to survive combat in the infantry. But I served in major campaigns, starting in Normandy, France, Battle of the Bulge, Rhineland, Germany, and we wound up in Czechoslovakia over a period of 11 months. So I was in 5 major campaigns and lucky to survive them all.
And I was in some of the same campaigns as Nick, from Normandy all the way through to the end of the war. Plus because half of my unit went to Italy to stage the southern France invasion, I have a battle star for the Romarno campaign, the invasion of southern France. And the other ones are the same as Nick, have the same battle stars. And I'd like to tell you how we met. I was in the Air Corps. I was in Troop Carrier Command, 9th Air Force, and our job was to deliver paratroopers and gliders and airborne operations, and to resupply them from the air, also to evacuate wounded, and to carry any kind of supplies that are needed. Now, I met Nick on an honor flight to Washington, D.C. to see the World War II Memorial, and we got to talking and found out that we almost met at Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge. Nick was in the 4th Armored Division. He was in the Armored Infantry. And I was in the plane overhead dropping supplies to the 101st, which is cut off at Bastogne. And he was in the Armored Divisions that I was able to witness on the 26th of December 1944, coming up from the south with Patton's 4th Armored Division to relieve the 101st. And we saw them coming in. And here's Nick down below, and he saw our planes dropping all these supplies to the 101st on a frozen, snow-covered field. It was horribly cold. And he saw us up there. He wished he was with us, but I don't think we wished we were with you. No. He was down on the ground doing the hard work. We got to go back to warm beds that night.
Yeah, I was envious of those guys, but I could see those parachutes coming down and so relieved that we were getting help, because the skies were cloudy and the Air Corps wasn't able to fly during the Battle of the Bulge. And when the skies cleared, then guys like Jack were able to help us out with supplies, and the fighter planes came in. And an interesting story is that Patton, who was my superior general, ordered the chaplain to make the skies clear. You know, he said, "I want you to use your influence and get these skies cleared, chaplain." Well, anyway, we were fortunate. But Jack is correct. When I looked up and saw those planes, I said, "Boy, I sure wish I was up there rather than down here," because it was very difficult. Snow-covered field, frozen. You couldn't dig a foxhole, and it was bad enough trying to battle the Germans eyeball to eyeball. But to protect yourself was essentially just above ground. And we were very fortunate to have survived it where I was. Some of my friends didn't survive it. It was a terrible time. War is hell, and I'll be the first one to say that if you're going to avoid a war, you should. But there are times I was just an 18-year-old kid, 19 years old at the time. I just turned 19.
He's younger than me and outranked me.
Well, I'm 6 months younger than Jack. And as I said, if you're in the combat infantry and you survive, you attain seniority very quickly. And that's what happened to me.
Nick and I met on an honor flight. We've been reminiscing a lot on that trip about meeting each other from the air and down the ground. But actually, we started the flying on December 23rd. That's when it lifted up. We did 4 airdrops to Bastogne, and 23rd, 24th. Christmas socked in. We couldn't take off. We were based in England, and we couldn't take off. On the 26th and 27th, we did. And although they had been The 4th Armored got to them on the 26th. We still did an airdrop on the 27th. And but anyway, that's how we almost met.
That's right.
And we share some common experiences in a way. And it's interesting, when we were, the crew chief and I was a radio operator, and our job was to get rid of the parapacks in the hold. The pirates had parapacks on the bottom of the plane they could trigger, like bombs dropping, and we had to put these parapacks in the hold out on static lines like the troopers used, and it was, the doors was off the plane, ice. We must have 60 degrees wind chill factor up. I was colder, but only for a little while. He was colder for longer. But we just finished dropping those and went up front to look out through the cockpit, and we saw these tanks of 4th Armored first coming up, and we saw below a windbreak of trees a whole bunch of German tanks lined up, a Tiger, Royal Tiger, and Panthers, whole line of them. We thought, uh-oh, because the tanks were superior tanks, and we thought, uh-oh, and we only had about 3 or 4 months to see all this. We saw an awful lot, and the P-47 came out and dropped a bomb on that lead Tiger, and the rest of them just wheeled around and took off. So they weren't menaced by those guys. That was fascinating to see it, and fascinating to see them come up to relieve Bastogne. That was really wonderful. And I have a very small part in it. I tell everybody, what did you do in the war? Essentially, I was a passenger. But I also got calluses from handing off all those gas cans to the 4th Armored Division tanks. We resupplied them from Normandy all the way through to Metz in Alsace-Lorraine.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, you had a great view of the war. I would have preferred to have had that view than the one I had.
Well, I got a warm bed nearly every night.
Yeah. But going into Bastogne was quite an experience, all right. We started attacking. Our division actually was in Alsace-Lorraine, which was about 100 miles south of Belgium, and we drove 2 days and 1 night from Alsace-Lorraine to Belgium, a town called, gosh, I'm forgetting, Arlon. That was in Arlon, Belgium. And then we started attacking to break the siege at Bastogne a couple of days before Christmas. Patton had promised the 101st that we'd get there on Christmas Day. Well, we didn't make it. We got there the day after. But it was difficult. It was very tough fighting, and not only brutal in terms of fighting the enemy, but the weather was terrible. You couldn't dig a foxhole, so you had to just take care of the elements the best way you could. And once we got into Bastogne, I remember we cleared the woods in a small village called Assenois, Assenois. That's the French pronunciation. And we went through the woods and cleared the woods, and it was about 2 kilometers away from Bastogne. And then while we were doing that, a tanker by the name of First Lieutenant Bogus had knocked out a German pillbox, and he and his 3 tanks got into Bastogne, and we followed them in. And as we went into Bastogne, I always remember this, there were foxholes with dead paratroopers, American paratroopers, and one of them was a young guy, must have been 20 years old. His left arm was sticking out of the foxhole, and he had a wedding ring on his hand. And the thought the thought that went through my hand was, what a message his wife is going to get. You know, here it is, Christmas time, what a New Year's message he's going to get. Anyway, I always remember that. We got into Bastogne, and the first thing we did was head for cover. We went into a building because we'd been exposed all this time, and the German Air Force was active, and they bombed us that very first night. They came over and bombed us, and it turned out the man that was on guard duty in my particular platoon next to the half-track was killed. The bomb landed close enough so that it killed him. We were in a building, and we slept on the floor, and the windows were shattered. And fortunately, if we hadn't been on the floor, those broken windows would have done a number on us, and we survived it. And then after that, of course, there was Germany yet to go through, and we did, you know.
And also, my part in that, we got small arms fire and a little 20-millimeter flak, that's little white puffs off, but mostly the German soldiers on the ground that we flew over hadn't had skeet training because they didn't lead us. And almost all the bullets we got, small arms fire, because we flew about 700 feet to these paradrops, were in the tail. And thankfully, they didn't get us.
Yeah.
So Nick had a lot of, I was also lucky too, because after we pushed those parapacks out, my crew chief and I got to go up in the cabin, flight cabin, and it was heated. We had on every stitch of clothing we had, and there was fleece line stuff too, you know, but it wasn't enough
Still
back
cold.
there. But not like he did. And we got to go back to a warm cot in England
Sure,
that
that's
night.
true. That's what I always liked about the Air Corps. You get,
Oh, yeah.
At least you could sleep in a warm bed at night.
Yeah, the food wasn't that bad either. Not as good as Navy food, but
Oh, the Navy was terrific food.
oh, we heard they had beans for breakfast.
Yeah, we had K rations and those C rations,
Yeah.
but the 10-in-1 rations.
10 and ones, we delivered a lot of those to you
Yeah,
guys.
sure.
We brought a lot of 10 and ones. Interesting story is my crew chief copped, or the case of those 10 and ones we were delivering. We carried almost anything and evacuated wounded too and everything, but he copped one of those 10 and 1 case of rations before we offloaded them, and somehow some major came over and he was looking for one. He had an accurate count of them, but he came over, and we're all standing in the door of the plane looking out. And he came over and he wanted to come aboard and check to see if we had one of those. And my pilot, who was a first lieutenant, and the co-pilot, second lieutenant, stand in the doorway, talking to this major. And he said, "We're coming aboard." He said, "I'm sorry, Major, I'm the captain of this plane and you can't come aboard." Darn thing he couldn't. He would have discovered that my crew chief had stolen those CM1 rations.
They were good rations.
They were good compared to K rations,
Yeah,
which
well,
we usually carried with us.
They were good
Because
rations.
we occasionally had to spend the night on the ground somewhere. And K rations were my only good thing about K rations. They had 4 cigarettes in them and a hard chocolate bar.
That's right. The cigarettes were good bartering
They were.
material. The thing about the parachutes too, they were different colors. I remember that vividly. And I took a parachute, I forget what color it was, and used it as a mattress to sleep on to protect me from the cold on
Oh
the
yeah,
ground.
you needed that. I hate to tell him this, but they actually gave us down-filled sleeping bags to wear on the plane when we had to spend the night on the ground.
Were those the mummy bags that you?
Yeah, little mummy
Well, we
bags,
had
and
those.
they were eider-down bags. They were wonderful. They wouldn't let me bring it home.
Yeah.
But those colors denoted what was in those parapacks. One color was for ammunition, one color was for medicine, one color was for food. And I hope we were dropping up some warm clothing, because that 101st went in there without enough warm clothing. And it was
true.
December and it was bitterly cold. I don't know why in the wartime, I was based in England, it was bitterly cold in England. The snow in England was wet, and it's always cold. But not anything like he had to endure. Well, I was telling earlier that we supplied the 4th Armored Division all the way from the breakthrough of avalanches in Normandy, all the way when they got bogged down in Alsace-Lorraine. We carried 5-gallon cans of jerry can almost every day to them. And also, we were supposed to pull off an airdrop, an airborne operation in front of Patton in central France. And the 4th Armored overran it before we needed to pull it off. But we didn't need to pull it off because of all the service that my unit had done in helping Patton's group. He had recaptured a bunch of champagne the Germans had taken from the French, and he sent it back to us. And here we are, drinking champagne out of canteen cups.
That was great. Well, I have a similar story. You know, when we broke through on Operation Cobra out of Normandy, we went across France in about a month. It was really a
He went
blitzkrieg.
west.
First we went west to Lorient, and then we went across France in about a month.
Mhm.
We were we could hardly keep up with the Germans. Actually, they were in full retreat, and there was a city on the Seine River, south and east of Paris, called Troyes.
Troy
in French. And we liberated a cellar that had all the champagne in it that the Germans. The Germans had sequestered there for their use. So our half-track must have had about, 6 or 7 big 12 cases of champagne. So we were really living it up. And it turns out that our particular company was on reserve, and we spent the night in Troyes with this champagne. And of course it was great living, but the Germans were still around, you know. But when you're in a war, you don't think, you know. You really don't, and you take what you can when you can. Then the headquarters came up and they put a lock on the champagne, and they were distributing 1 bottle a week or so to each squad. Well, here we had several cases of the stuff. You know? Anyway,
they were polluted. I don't know how they fought.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it's interesting. Besides carrying all these 5-gallon jerry cans to the 4th Armored, we also we also brought back their wounded. We carried 18 litters on the plane that we could put down the side seats, bucket seats, and we had strapped to carry 18 litters. When we went on that kind of mission, we carried a flight nurse and a medic technician, which Nick was at the time. And we would land anywhere near an aid station or where they could bring us by ambulance. We would bring back wounded people back to a field hospital. First near London, where we were based in England. In January, we went to France, and there we sometimes flew 3 missions a day from there. And we would bring them back to a field hospital near Paris. But many of the people that we brought back to hospital near Paris were 4th Armored Division tankers, and they were almost horribly burned.
Yeah.
Because many of the tankers suffered horrible burns, because when something would hit their tank, it would blow up, or they would hit it with fire or something that caused fire. And we brought back a lot of horribly burned 4th Armored to the hospitals.
Now the tankers, see, in an armored division, you have 3 battalions of tanks, 3 battalions of infantry. That's what I was in. And we rode on half tracks when you could. And then
He wasn't a foot slogger.
well, half of the time we were.
Yeah.
And then there were 3 battalions of so-called self-propelled artillery.
Yeah.
And that was patterned after the German Panzer.
I know.
units, you
Blitzkrieg.
You're right. But
Patton did them with it.
right, exactly.
I got to tell you this. And we got a daily paper here called the Stars and Stripes.
Yeah.
And they had an article once about the 4th Armored's motto, cleared to the berms. That's what they said. Once they were always way ahead of the infantry, and they had cleared the roads to the berms of German soldiers.
Yeah.
Cleared to the berms, that was their motto.
That's true. And the other thing is, I'm told, I didn't hear this personally, but one of our tankers, we were usually surrounded because we were the spearhead, more or less, and we were usually surrounded, and one of these tankers says, those poor bastard Germans, they've got us surrounded. They don't know what they're...
That's right. If you only cleared up the road, they're on all sides of you.
Right. But it was, and the thing about being in an armored division, we were constantly attacking, always on the move.
I know,
you
always. And successful.
And successful. That's why Patton was successful.
Right.
He used the same technique that the Germans did in their blitzkrieg.
Both of us have seen his grave in an American cemetery in Luxembourg. He's buried, he's no more different than all the GIs buried there, except it's set apart with a marker. But it's the same simple grave that all the GIs have.
Yeah, that's in a town called Ham, of all things, Ham, Luxembourg. And I visited that and found the grave of one of my comrades who was buried there,
Yep.
a young guy. He was a couple of years older than I was. He was a Jewish guy from Berwyn, Illinois, but a courageous, brave guy. And he was killed about 6 weeks before the war ended.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
But they buried him in Luxembourg.
And he was buried
You
in
saw him there.
And I always wondered about that because he was married and he was Jewish, and Jewish families are usually fairly close. He was married, and I think probably when they told his wife that he had been killed, she probably said, well, bury him over there. And it was really surprising to find his grave in Luxembourg, you know. And he was a brave guy. He was a platoon sergeant. He was a staff sergeant, tech sergeant before I was. And he could speak Yiddish.
Oh yeah?
And that's close enough to German so that when sometimes we would go into these villages and he would get on a bullhorn and use his best Yiddish, and half a dozen Krauts would come out of the cellars with their hands up. They would give up. Leonard Goodman was his name. He was killed in March of 1945, shortly after we crossed the Rhine River.
This saying Yiddish reminds me of a story. All of these things remind me of a story. I was, a part of my job was to bring back survivors from 3 concentration camps. My particular unit went to 3 concentration camps. and one was Dachau. And I remember 5 of the boys we brought back to a field hospital near Paris were Jewish kids. They were 14, 15 years old, and they were good health because they fed them. And not like most of the other people who were emaciated we brought back, we starved. But they used them for laborers. And our navigator was Jewish, and he spoke Yiddish. And of course, that's a universal Jewish language. And he could talk to these boys. And they had scars, you know, in addition to the tattoos on the arms of the prisoners, they had little pit marks all over their arms. And he asked them about those, and they said, well, the guards at Dachau for sport used to have them run, and they'd sick the dogs on them. And the dogs would come and get them and bite them a little bit before they took them off. But they do this a number of times. They had marks all over their arms from this, can you believe, dog barks. Now that's not an apocryphal story. That's true. That's what the boys told us, and I believe them. They didn't know exactly what had happened to their parents. They knew they'd been killed. They didn't know about gassing because they were workers and everything. And to be honest with you, the 3 concentration camps where we brought back survivors, we just loaded them on. We didn't get to go on and see the things, but so I didn't get to see the ovens and the gas chambers at Dachau, but I believe them. And all the people we talked to about the survivors told us stories. So what you read about the horrors, and these weren't the bad ones in Poland, like those bad ones you hear about, these were bad, but it was true. I know these stories were true because we got them firsthand from these guys. Mm-hmm. And they weren't elaborating. They were just glad to get out there and be liberated. I was at Dachau and Buchenwald and Nordhausen. Nordhausen weren't too many to bring back because the Germans had killed them nearly all, and they hadn't had time to bury them. And it was probably the worst place we went to. But be honest with you, I just remember those Jewish boys. They're so vivid in my mind about the navigator being able to talk to them. I can't remember the composition of the survivors we brought back from Buchenwald.
But you said the smell from the air?
Huh?
But you talked about
Nordhausen
the
you
smell.
could. They were stacked up like cordwood. They hadn't had time to bury them before our troops got in and liberated the concentration camp. But the concentration camps were real. Some people today say, oh, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It did happen.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the concentration camps that we liberated, which was late in the war, April of 1945, and our division got to a camp known as Ohrdruf, O-H-R-D-R-U-F. It was a satellite camp for Buchenwald, and it's near the town that Bach was born, actually, near a town called Gotha. And it was everything that I think Jack had talked a little bit about before. It wasn't a big camp, but you know, the people were emaciated and obviously in dire straits. And what we did, which was stupid, is we gave them some of our rations. And that was a wrong thing to do because people were not supposed to eat things right away. They were supposed to be brought back. So what did we know? We didn't know anything. But I must admit, you know, I saw what you see in the newsreels and in the movies about how bad the people were treated and everything. But I had reached a point where I guess I'd become insensitive to things like that. I'd been in combat for 10 years, and I saw close comrades of mine who were beheaded, killed, maimed, and I had reached the attitude, I guess, where everything was subliminal. I saw these people, and they looked bad, but it, you know, I thought, my God, you know. But at the same time, it probably didn't affect me as much as it did a lot of other people. Well, when we got there, we were only there for about 3 or 4 hours, and then I read later that Eisenhower was informed of this, so he got Patton and Bradley to come with him, and he brought journalists to film it, to show what had happened. And then he brought in the Burgermeister, the mayor of the town, to see what had happened. The Burgermeister in his town and his wife came to see what had happened. And then they used the citizens of that town to dig the trenches to bury the corpses. And then I read later that the Burgermeister and his wife claimed that they really didn't know what was happening, and that may be true. But that evening, both of them hanged themselves when they went back, so that says something. Anyway, we went on, and from there we went to Czechoslovakia, met the Russians, and then the war ended, and then we wound up in a Army of Occupation in a town called Worth, W-O-R-T-H. They pronounce it Worth in German, W-O-Umlaut, near Regensburg. And I was there until the war ended. Now, I was told to tell a story about Patton. I saw General Patton on 3 occasions. The last time was when I came home from Normandy at Camp Lucky Strike. They named these camps after cigarettes, Lucky Strike, Chesterfield, and whatever. And he came and talked to us as troops that he had used us a lot in the campaign. And I was told to tell the story. The other occasion was at one time we had been pulled back briefly, and there was a black unit called the Red Ball Express, which supplied us with, they drove these big 4x4, 6x6 trucks, and they supplied us with ammunition and various supplies, and they supplied us across France, as did Jack's C-47s.
We carried gas to them. We unloaded 5 gallons of jerry can gas right up to the tanks, or the trucks bring it up to the tank.
Yeah, and the half tracks. I rode in a half track when it was possible, and these jerry cans were all over. We were using gas like crazy. Anyway, Patton was talking to us, and there was a group of black soldiers, a few nurses. It was a multi-group, and he looked out over out over the audience, and he says, "You know, I don't give a good goddamn what the color of your skin is. I just want you to kill those dirty bastards in the green uniforms." But that was Patton, and he was a great general. He was a tough guy, but you got to give him credit, because we liberated more territory and captured and killed more Germans than any other group, any other army.
4th Armored Division is legendary,
Yeah.
and Nick will tell you this. He has a Silver Star.
Yeah. You know, there were a lot of people that should have gotten awards that did things. I did what my job was. When I initially joined the division, I was actually a medic in the infantry. And on many occasions, I would have to evacuate people that were what was called no man's land, somewhere between where our troops were and the Germans were on a couple of occasions. On one particular occasion, we were, in fact, just at the beginning of the Bulge, when we were attacking, we were told to withdraw, and this one guy was seriously wounded. He broken his leg, and everybody was withdrawing, and he really couldn't move. And I saw him, and I gave him a shot of morphine, and put a splint on his leg, and I said, "I'm not sure I can get you back." He said, well, and he looked at me and he said, "What am I going to do?" I said, "Well, you just be patient." I didn't say patient, I said be careful. So I went back, and I was able to get a couple of guys to come with me. Nobody wanted to come, because here we were in between what was going on.
You're getting shot at.
Getting shot at. So we evacuated him, but I had evacuated other wounded people before. Going through France and in parts of Germany, I had evacuated people, and it was brutal, because, you know, a guy gets hit, he yells medic, and you do what you can for him. And I'd evacuated a couple of people that I was able to bring back just by myself. So they wrote me up for this, you know. It was doing my job, essentially.
He's not going to say it. Silver Star.
So I got the Silver Star for it. And but about shortly after the Bulge, the man that I had talked about earlier, Leonard Goodman, told me, "Look, you know, you're exposing yourself more than the rifleman is. You should, and moreover, you've got more experience than the replacements are getting. You should become a rifleman, and you should be a squad leader." So I went into the infantry carrying a rifle. And the other reason I did that was when we were going through France, the Germans actually killed 3 medics. They by and large, they honored the fact that they were medics, but they killed 3 of them, plus a physician, gunned them down. Cold
Now,
blood.
what did you wear, a Red Cross on your
We
helmet?
wore Red Cross, you know. So at that point in time, I says, you know, if that's going to happen to me, I want to be able to shoot back.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So I became a rifleman, staff sergeant, squad leader at that point, and then for the rest of the war. Well, Goodman, the tech sergeant that got me to do that, was killed as we crossed the Rhine. So I became the tech sergeant for a short period of time. Meanwhile, one of our older infantrymen that had been a man by the name of Lou Tamillo had been hospitalized. He came back up and he was made the platoon sergeant. Well, we get into a town on the Main River, cross the river, we get across the river, and he's killed in an ambush in a Jeep. So I was made the platoon sergeant. Anyway, so that was early April or so, and then the war ended a month later.
In May,
May.
I'll never forget that.
And during that period of time, even though I was a young guy, I realized this war is going to be over pretty soon. We're deep into Germany. I'm not going to take any chances. So I was sent on a couple of patrols, and I must admit that I wasn't as aggressive as I may have been in the past, and survived the war, you know. But you do things, it's reflex action actually. You do things, you don't think about them. You know, if you were to think about what you did, you probably wouldn't do them, and if you really logically, why would I do that, you know? Anyway, so, but there are a lot of guys that deserve medals that did things that probably weren't accounted for. During the Battle of the Bulge, we had a guy that won the Medal of Honor going into Bastogne, who knocked out a couple of German.
People ask why we did things. We said we had to.
Yeah.
They were supposed to do these.
Well, you really didn't have to. There were some people that didn't, but by and large, most everybody.
Yeah, everybody did.
Yeah,
what they had to.
we had people that deserted, a few, some that would just not do it, but yeah, but you do things like that, you know. Anyway, so that's how I won the medal. Now I got the Bronze Star because if you're in combat for 5 campaigns, they automatically give you the Bronze Star.
They're called sweat medals. I got 3 of them.
And Jack here's got more medals than I've
No,
got,
I got
so
air,
he's gonna
air
have to
medals.
tell you.
They're not all brave for bravery. They're for,
Yeah, but
they're for getting shot at.
Nevertheless, you know, flying up.
They're called sweat medals, and they're aptly so because we sweated out getting shot at.
Sure, that's true, but nevertheless, you know, flying in that plane, you know.
But the value of the medals was the points they gave us to get
Exactly,
those.
that's what happened. After the war, you were sent home based on the number of points you had. So you got 1 point for every month in the service, 2 points if it was overseas, 5 points for every medal,
And
5 points for every campaign. So I had about 80 points. And I got out real early. My brother went in the military 6 months before I did. He didn't get out until 6 months later because he didn't see combat, good fortunately for him. And I knew guys that were at the air base in Boise, Idaho, who never left the States. I went overseas, came back, and they were still there,
Yeah.
you know. But that was
They
great.
didn't have the points.
They didn't have the points, and they were doing things. One was a basketball player from Alabama, a hell of a nice guy, and he played on the basketball team at the base, so he never left Boise, Idaho, you know. Anyway, it's an experience that, I'll just say this, it's an experience that really matured me. You know, I came out of that military, and I had matured in 2 years, which might have taken 10 years, I don't know. You get a different perspective on life. And the little things really never mattered. And so in many ways, it would be great if everybody could have that experience. It really would. But at the same time...
Without going to war.
Exactly, as long as you knew you were going to survive it. But that's not possible, so. And it was a great time. We wanted to go to war because the Germans and the Japanese were just going through everything, and here I was. We were ready to volunteer. I remember going to the assembly in high school right after Pearl Harbor. All of us wanted to go to war, and the principal said, no, be patient. you'll have your opportunity.
In a way, it was a holy war.
It was a holy war. It was a survival war, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the story about that. And I don't really feel any more of a hero than the guys that did every bit as much as I did and some more, you know, that never got acknowledged for it. Jack, it's all yours.
Well, you know, they call us the greatest generation. I think we were just ordinary people.
Yeah.
Did what we had to do, and some things like Nick did were extraordinary. And what I did was ride along. But it turns out I had a lot of experiences in that short time, and like Nick, it matured me quite a bit too. According to my folks, not enough, but it did. And although war is horrible, the experiences Nick and I had, now that we have lived so long and can remember them, have contributed a lot to the kind of people we became, I think. So, I don't know. But now, all of my experiences weren't just with the 4th Armored. Actually, we had an intimate relationship with the 101st Airborne Division, which we resupplied at Bastogne, which is where I almost met Nick. But we had, my group had dropped the 101st into Normandy on D-Day, early morning hours of D-Day when it's dark. But I wasn't there. I joined as a replacement crew a month later. But we did drop the 101st into Holland as part of the Operation Market Guard. We did 5 days of operation there. With second day we towed gliders and about 3 days of resupplying from the air. I think it was a new airborne division we dropped across the Rhine at Wesel up in the Ruhr. I think that was a new airborne division called the 17th. But anyway, but we had only about 4 or 5 major airborne operations. Most of the things we did were mundane resupplying by air, any kind of thing they needed. The very first mission I did, flying to Normandy in July of 1944, was carrying these huge coils of signal corps wire over to Normandy. We were based in England, and the plane we were given, we'd left our good new plane in Ireland, and the plane they gave us, an old survivor of the African campaign. It was still painted salmon pink, and it had wrinkles in the fuselage. It was so old. But the first day out with the signal corps wire drums back in the hold, we had an engine go out over the channel, and with boom, one engine, all that heavy went right down to the waves. And the pilot said, "Richie, you and Jack, Richie's the crew chief, you got to get rid of that wire." We did back. We opened the doors because there wasn't an airborne operation, so the doors were shut, and we dumped those out in the channel. Not time too soon, but with that, we got back to our base in England on one engine, and our pilot wore thin leather gloves. It might have been the affectation he had, but you could wring the water out of those gloves when he got back to base. What a great pilot he was, and a good friend. In the Air Corps, we didn't have much formality like most of the time. We didn't salute our officers. We called each other by our first names generally. Well, but we had a lot of informality. But our pilots were our friends. So, and they were officers and we weren't.
Jack, have you kept in contact with your crew?
Pardon me?
Have you kept in contact with your crew?
I did keep in contact with the pilot for a long time, but he passed away and I'm not in contact anymore, of course. He stayed in the Air Force, became a captain, and I don't know how much longer he was in, because mostly after World War II they didn't want you anymore. But he stayed in for a while. He'd been a music teacher for the war, can you believe? He's a great guy. He's from Texas. And anyway, we corresponded for a while. But like the girlfriend I had in England, we quit corresponding after a while.
Well, it's interesting, you know, in my outfit, I had it, like I mentioned Leonard Goodman earlier, I probably would have kept in touch with him. But we had such a turnover. We had about 150% turnover in our outfit. So you really didn't have an opportunity to build. You did in a way to build relationships, but you know, very little of that happened in my case. So I contacted two people. Penny and I were on our honeymoon in Southern California, and I did contact a guy that I'd been in the military with, a guy by the name of John Claypack, he actually had worked in Hemet of all places, and then settled in Los Angeles. And somebody looked me up once when I was back home, and a guy by the name of Anderson who stayed in the military, but other than that, I didn't have really any close contacts. You know.
Well, I was in close contact with several of my friends for a number of years that weren't my crew, but were fellow radio operators. One actually was another group, but we came home together. We both volunteered for that same mission. And he was, he owned a dairy farm in Wisconsin, German descent, can you believe, very classic. We visited him once, and we enjoyed visiting him on a dairy farm up in Wisconsin. He herded the cattle in with Honda 90s, which I had one, so I knew how to drive a Honda 90, and I helped herd the cattle back at night. And he said, "Jack, you're so interested in dairy farming, why don't you become one?" I said, "I'm not crazy. I'm not getting up at 3 in the morning for anybody." That's what they did. Went to bed at 9, got up at 3. Okay, a short snorter was something that the RAF and the Air Corps did. Wherever you go, you get a sample of the currency from the country yard, and you'd paste them together. You had a long string of them. And the idea was you'd get all your friends that were in the places that shared these pictures to sign them. So the idea was, so you'd go up to a bar, and who had the longest short snorter was okay. Who had the shortest had to buy the drinks. Now that was not really honored in the reality, because somebody's going to buy the drinks for everybody then anyway. But that was the whole idea. If you had the shortest short snorter, you'd buy the drinks. And I told Chrissy about it. She didn't know about it. But when we were in Washington on the trip, we went to the Naval Museum, remember? Mm-hmm. And they had a short snorter on display there by the M1 rifle. Remember that? Right below the M1 rifle, which was the rifle I trained on.
You trained with an M1?
Yeah, we had to learn.
Kidding.
Oh yeah, we had.
During the Battle of the Bulge, some of the replacements were guys that had been in the Air Corps. They were ground crew, and many of them didn't know what an M1 was.
Well, they should have had to have it in basic training.
Maybe they did.
Well, some of them had 3 Springfields. Yeah. You know, when they might have been in that early, but I had an M1, and you had to. Basic training, you had to qualify. And sure. I didn't carry one. I carried a shoulder holster 45, and I had to qualify with that to get to be a crew member, to stay a crew member. But my life depended on using it. I would have been dead. But some guys did got shot down, did have to stay up and fight. So the last few missions, combat missions I went on, I took my 45 over to Tech Supply and said, "Give me a carbine. It's much lighter than Garand."
30 caliber.
I said, "Because I'm a sharpshooter with a rifle, but my life depends on my 45. I won't make it." But they were hard. In case you were shot down, the 45 you could strap around. Sure. You carry with buckskin straps around you. With a carbine, you'd have to somehow strap it on you, because if you have to parachute out, you can't handle the guns very good. Anyway, I carried the carbine. I figured if I've got to, which some of our guys did have to stay down, get shot down and fight. I said, I want something I can shoot. Because I grew up with guns. I was given a 20-gauge shotgun for my 10th Christmas.
You'd have been great in the infantry too, Jack.
No.
Well, that kind of training. The carbine.
Well, I was a Boy Scout.
The carbine, well, it wasn't a bad weapon, but the M1 was a better weapon. It wasn't
powerful like an M1, but it was light and easy to carry, and much more accurate than the 45.
Sure.
Now, some people like Scott is a sharpshooter with a 45 in the Navy. He's got a medal for it.
Yeah, sure.
But I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
What'd you carry?
We had an M1.
Garand, the one you saw in the Navy Museum. Remember I asked? Yeah. They have one there.
Semi-automatic it was, You could make it automatic by, the carbine you could too.
Well, you know, 101st Paratrooper made mine semi-automatic. He fouled it off and he clipped my cartridges together, two up and one down.
Right.
So you could flip them real
Sure.
quick and you just keep holding. It wasn't very fast. Pop, pop,
Yeah.
pop, pop. By the way, did you ever encounter the German Schmeiser machine pistol?
All the time. All the time.
We call them burp guns. You
Well,
could
that-
hear them. You know, we flew low enough, we'd hear the small arms fire, which mostly we got. The burp gun would go.
Exactly.
And
Their weapons fired at twice the speed of ours, I think.
we didn't have anything like that.
No. I'm not sure that was a big advantage, but it's true.
Well-
You could distinguish an American rifle from a German rifle because of the speed, or automatic weapon, at the speed at which they were firing. And you know, that was kind of a troublesome thing in this respect. Going through France, some of the FFI, the resistance of the French, had these German weapons.
Did they?
And they'd be firing them, and you know, you could mistake them for a German.
Hey,
rather
German.
than- Anyway.
You know,
Well,
we
the Germans
got-
had superior weapons.
We went down to Dijon once and trained some free FFI guys, dropped them, trained them as paratroopers. Crazy guys. I said, boy, be careful of these guys. Be sure to open your chute when you get out.
Well, now, but when you carried paratroopers, didn't they have this cable?
Static line.
And then that would automatically open
Oh,
the
yeah,
chute
yeah,
as
the
you went
fridge
out.
too, but
How many paratroopers would you carry at one
I think
time?
about 24, 12 of the stick on each side.
Couple
And
of
they
squads.
line up and hook, I say, they stand up and hook up. And we had lights back by the door. A jump master stood there. He was a 101st Airborne guy, or, you know, 70th. But my crew chief and I also stood back there to assist. And when the light would be red, and then when it go green, that's when we'd start the stick. And they went out in no time. But you know, it's a funny thing, on my first combat mission into Holland, we had a guy on the ground who had a BAR, which is a Browning automatic rifle. It's very long.
Yeah.
He was having all sorts of trouble with his gear. And as he went out, I think he was third in the stick, his darn BAR caught in the door, rattled it. And here he is, hanging, and we had most of the stick behind him, 20 more guys behind him or so. And so we had to leave the formation. And be honest with you, we could see the tracers coming up, you know, the flame from the trees and stuff. And we sure, oh, we're going to be a sitting duck. But believe it or not, we didn't get any more fire. We left and came back around and got rid of our stick. We pulled him back in. And the crew chief and I and the jump master pulled him back in. And needed all three of us to get him back in with all his gear.
But you couldn't pull him back in a sufficient time for him to jump.
No, we had to go back around and join the rear of our formation. But we did, and it worked out. And that was my first mission. And I guess I was too scared to even think about it.
That was in Holland.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a disaster.
No, well, it was eventually, but it wasn't in a way. The 6th Airborne of the British 6th Airborne was dropped across the Rhine at Arnhem, and they were wiped out. There was a German panzer group
right.
back on reserve there,
Right.
and they just wiped them out. But we did liberate almost all of Holland.
Yeah.
Like the 101st objective at Eindhoven, which was the first drop inside Holland, where we dropped them, was to capture bridges and keep them open
Right.
for the British Second Army. And the 82nd was dropped at Nijmegen a little farther on, and they secured that bridge. And eventually the British Second Army did come up, and come all the way up almost to Arnhem, and liberate Holland. And you know, it's a funny thing, when Mary and I, on one of our trips, we were in Amsterdam. We were staying at our hotel was outside Amsterdam. And on our free day, we'd gone in to see the Van Gogh Museum, which wasn't on our tour. And we'd taken the train. We're coming back on the train, and a gal, the conductor, she had a pin on it that said Nijmegen on it. I said, "Oh, you from Nijmegen?" I don't know, she did a triathlon or something there. And I said, "Oh," she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, our outfits did airborne operations." And you know, she said, "We thank you for what you did for us."
Yeah.
And the same thing happened. Do you remember the museum at Bastogne?
Yeah.
Okay, we were there watching that tableau around that pit, and it showed our planes coming over, dropping. I said, "Oh, there's us." And I was later, Mary and I were walking around looking at some of the exhibits, and a Belgian guy came up to us and said, and that's French-speaking Belgium there, that part, not Flemish. And he came and said, "Monsieur, you were here." I said, "Well, in a way, I was about 1,000 feet overhead there, you know." And he said, "One of the planes." He said the same thing. He said, "Monsieur, we thank you."
Yeah.
And amazing. And they
We
weren't even
had-
born. They weren't even born.
Sure.
But they teach that
Yeah.
about the schools.
I got the same reaction when we were in Normandy talking to people there. In my best French, I tried to tell them I was there, you know. And my best French is not very good, but they thanked me, you know.
Yeah.
With tears in their eyes,
Yeah.
shaking our hand and thanking the Americans.
Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't interrupt. Sorry.
A lot of us aren't dirty Americans.
But it was so moving.
I remember Mary and I took a bike trip to France, and we were in the part of France that we had liberated, and people treated us awfully nice,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
very nice. I'd get out my little book, my little, what's the name of the, anyway, my little
French
French,
phrase.
Frank English dictionary book and try to talk to them, you know. And we got along pretty good. They would like to talk about it. And there's a tribute in England, by the way, the 8th Air Force. We went to there up in East Anglia. And then in France, near Tours, there's a monument there to the American forces liberating. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So, anyway, as you could tell from Nitz and I talking, that now that we think about it, and we've been lauded so much, people making over us now, we can talk about these things, and we can tell you the truth that we hope the greatest generation is the current one.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've had people ask me, well, do you think that modern guys would do what you did? I said, sure, I think they would. Why wouldn't they? You know, if you look at what happened at 9/11, you know, people got together and we were all, you know, we were all one and ready to support them.
Who's this guy?
And
Volunteer.
Exactly. You know,
He doesn't know why he's volunteered.
Sure.
He doesn't know whether he's in harm's way or not.
You know,
And Scotty, same thing, my oldest grandson. No, and I'm sure if Matt was called, he'd do it too. And Matt, probably good a shot as Scotty. He grew up firing those, what are those pistols you used to shoot all the time?
Airsoft guns? I'm shooting right now. What are you talking about?
you're a
Anyway.
shooter.
Their home, and part of their acreage had a creek down below. And what you made a range down there, didn't you?
Paintball guns, but we're not talking about that. How about, could you tell us about when the war ended, how it felt, and where you were?
Well, when the war ended, I was in Czechoslovakia. Our division had gone all that distance.
You mean May 8th or the war in Japan?
May 8th. The war ended in Europe in May 8th, and we were in Czechoslovakia. We had met the Russians. See, in an armored division, you're quite mobile, and they purposely sent us down there to get as far east as possible, because Churchill felt that the Russians would be too much of an influence.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we actually let them get
it was regular army.
Wait,
then
what was your guys' serial codes again?
Army of the United States.
Yeah, and then when they ran out of numbers in the 3, they drafted so many guys, they went to 4.
They did. I never knew any for it.
What was your guys' serial code numbers again?
What?
What was your serial code?
39, 29, 75, 72.
39, 92, 00, 35.
He went after me. You had to say that every time you got paid and salute.
See, and the first number you were told whether you're drafted, regular army, or national. The second number told you what part of the United States you came from, which area.
Yeah.
9 was the Northwest
West.
United States. What was yours, John?
39. I was 9. The West.
Okay, was it all the West was 9?
And then what was the first
I
numbers?
don't know about the
3.
00.
3
That
means
was-
you were drafted.
Jack, how long has it been since you've actually?
But
got
everybody
to
was
see
drafted.
They wouldn't take any enlistments when I went in.
Well, that's
The
right.
good
They
thing
stopped the
was, it would
enlistment
have killed my
because
mother
automatic-
if I had enlisted. She wanted me to wait till the very
Well,
last
my
moment.
folks wouldn't have let me go.
Your mother?
No, she
No,
would have said
mine
nothing
either.
doing.
Mine either.
I was ready to go. Here we were in high school, senior in high school, the war breaks out. And you want to go to war.
All right, let him start this before you
I
do
gotta hurry
that.
up with
Okay,
it.
tell us
But
when to
neither
start.
nobody knows what they're